Thank you, Nina and Ricky. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles for NET25 World News. On tonight's headlines, 80 passengers survived the terrifying upside-down landing in Toronto. And the news starts now. A Delta passenger jet has crashed while landing in Toronto. Take a look at this shocking image of the plane upside down at the runway at Pearson International Airport. Now, the airport confirms that everyone on board is accounted for, and luckily there were no fatalities. However, several people have been injured. Yolanda Aspiras is reporting from Toronto.
Everyone aboard the aircraft survived. The plane flipped on its backside upon landing. The regional jet carried 76 passengers and 4 crew. All have been accounted for.
So the facts of the matter around this event that happened at approximately 2:30 p.m. is Delta Airlines Flight 4819 from Minneapolis to Toronto, operated by subsidiary Endeavour Air, was involved in a single aircraft accident upon landing at Toronto Pearson. The plane was carrying 4 crew and 76 passengers, among them 22 Canadians. The other passengers were multinational. Airport emergency workers mounted a textbook response, reaching the site within minutes and quickly evacuating the passengers. Again, there were no fatalities. 17 injured passengers were quickly taken to local area hospitals. At this time, we do not know of any of those passengers having critical injuries.
Of the 15 people injured, 3 are in critical condition. One of the critically injured is a child. Officials closed the airport's runways for about an hour and a half after the crash.
But I found that you were getting constant sayings on the intercom saying that there's a delay, etc. But everything seemed to be very normal.
Right, so we're off to Fort Lauderdale at 4:55, but we've been delayed only a half an hour so far. When I was grabbing lunch, I hear people at the table behind me saying there was an accident at Pearson. What? And then someone at the end of the bar said, "Yeah, the plane flipped over." I'm like, "What?" And so we're hearing cancellations and airport closed and all this for the longest time. And then finally, when information starts flowing, we're hearing that we're only delayed and not canceled. So we were going through the whole gamut of where we're going to stay tonight. Are we leaving tomorrow morning? We got to catch a cruise, and we can't catch any port of call until the beginning of March. So we got to get on this boat, right? So, yeah.
Emergency workers helped passengers escape from the plane while firefighters doused it with water. Survivors walk on a snow-covered tarmac to safety.
As we made our descent and made touchdown, it was just a very forceful event where all of a sudden everything just kind of went sideways. And then next thing I know is kind of a blink and I'm upside down, still strapped in, turned around, but it sounded, it was just cement and metal, I think there was paramedic of help move, and then as a father, I saw this boy and mom who were just, everyone seemed, not oddly calm, but everyone seemed like they were there to make sure we helped each other and, moved out of harm's way.
The airport had been dealing with high winds and frigid temperatures at the time of the crash. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada has launched an investigation. In Toronto, Canada, Yolanda Aspiras for NET25 World News. Back to you, Alma.
Yolanda, Greater Toronto has been hit with inclement weather and a snowstorm over this weekend. Now, what are the experts saying? Could the extreme weather be a factor in this accident?
Yes, Alma. According to experts, the weather appeared to be within what the airplane can manage. However, investigators mentioned that they'd be examining icing conditions, blowing snow, visibility issues, and the like. Experts also mentioned that Pearson Airport would know not to accept landings if they knew there was a serious concern about the surface.
Thank you, Yolanda. A diplomatic storm is brewing in Paris tonight, where European leaders are meeting amid reports that the U.S. plans to cut its own deal with Russia over Ukraine's future, leaving its allies out of the room. Take a look. The hallways of Paris Palace were filled with warm greetings today, but underneath those diplomatic smiles, European and NATO leaders are grappling with what many call the continent's biggest crisis in decades. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer didn't mince words.
At stake is not just the future of Ukraine, it is an existential question for Europe as a whole.
What's causing this anxiety? The Trump administration's latest move, direct negotiations with Russia over Ukraine's future without European or Ukrainian leaders at the table. Security expert Dr. David Blagden from the University of Exeter sees two possible scenarios.
You know, an optimistic take is to say, yeah, sure, the Americans are perfectly welcome to conduct bilateral diplomacy with whoever they want to, and they always have done. And if they see value in cooperating with the Russians on certain matters, as they have done throughout the course of the war, not always in the forefront, but in the background, continuing to keep diplomacy going, then fine. That's the sort of perhaps glass half full read on what's going on. But I think in particular there will be some very significant alarm in European capitals about what might be discussed with regards to the security of their continent, their home region.
But there's a darker possibility that has European leaders on edge. Here's Dr. Blagden again.
One sort of potentially really bad outcome for European capitals is to discover that the Americans have basically put them on the hook for attempting to do some sort of peacekeeping mission in Ukraine or whatever, without their say-so, effectively sort of presenting them with a fait accompli type scenario where they either then have to fulfill or deliver on what the Americans have said they'll do, or end up then having to kind of say, no, we won't do that, and some sort of agreement over Ukraine collapses in acrimony, and the Americans can point at the Europeans and say, well, this is all your fault, you wouldn't deliver.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has already taken aim at Europe's role.
The European philosophy has not gone anywhere, so I don't know what can they do at the negotiation table. If they continue scheming some tricky ideas on freezing the conflict while themselves, per usual, as they like and usually do, just mean continue the war, why invite them there?
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has landed in Saudi Arabia, where the first round of talks with the Russian delegation begins today. Dr. Blagden suggests Europe might have a way forward.
The Europeans could just decide to exercise more strategic autonomy. If they were willing to spend more on their own defence, they wouldn't have to be so dependent on the US position. The European alarm and the sort of European dilemma is largely a product of many decades of accumulated sort of free riding, choosing to or preferring to get spend on domestic goods, sort of welfare, sort of other aspects of the domestic economy rather than defence.
While Europe has already surpassed the U.S. in both military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine by billions of dollars, it's the Ukrainian people who continue to pay the ultimate price. European leaders meeting in Paris for emergency talks called for higher spending to ramp up the continent's defense capabilities. But they remain split on the idea of deploying peacekeepers to Ukraine to back up any peace deal. French President Emmanuel Macron called the Monday meeting after U.S. President Donald Trump arranged bilateral peace talks with Russia, excluding European allies and Ukraine. Thomas I. Likeness for more.
There seems to be a general consensus that more money has to be spent beefing up European defense forces. The division comes on whether to take things a step further and put troops on the ground in Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Europe has to do more to help Ukraine in its war with Russia, and he adds he would have no problem with Britain taking part in future peacekeeping efforts.
Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement. But there must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
But Starmer's push for peacekeepers has drawn opposition. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says talk of a German peacekeeping mission in Ukraine is highly inappropriate without any peace deal in hand. Italy's Giorgia Meloni says she too is against the peacekeeping plan. On the other side, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen says she's open to discussing troop deployments. She says Europe must boost its support for Ukraine.
I have never believed that the war in Ukraine is primarily about Ukraine. It's about Russia. And it's about their imperial dreams, about building a stronger and a bigger Russia. And I don't think they're going to stop in Ukraine. And therefore, I am very concerned about making a fast ceasefire, because it can actually give Putin and Russia a better possibility to go back to Russia and to re-ramp and to mobilize again, attack Ukraine or another country in Europe.
Scholz and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk say the EU's stringent fiscal rules should be loosened to allow more spending on defense without countries running afoul of the Union's deficit rules. All agreed that the peace talks should include the EU and Ukraine. Meanwhile, senior U.S. and Russian officials will meet in Saudi Arabia today. These are the highest-level in-person discussions between the nation in years. They're meant to precede a meeting between Trump and Putin. But there are signs of differences of approach. U.S. State Department spokesman Tammy Bruce says the conversation will determine if the Russians are serious about peace talks and whether perhaps if that first step is even possible. For its part, the Kremlin says the talks will focus on restoring the entire complex of Russian-American relations. Thomas I. Likeness, NET25 World News.
Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is suggesting sending troops to Ukraine. Bel Celestino reports.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is offering to send British troops to Ukraine, but only as part of a peacekeeping force after the war ends. This marks the first time he's explicitly committed to putting boots on the ground. The announcement comes at a critical moment. Last week, President Trump caught NATO allies off guard by revealing he'd held private talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump's Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, then indicated that Ukraine and European leaders would have no seat at the negotiating table. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Starmer explains his decision, quote, "I feel very deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way." He emphasized that any peace deal must prevent Putin from launching future attacks.
On defence, it's clear the US is not going to leave NATO. But we Europeans will have to do more. The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing, and Europeans will have to step up, both in terms of spending and the capabilities that we provide. Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement.
His country playing a unique role. He's positioning the UK as a potential bridge between Europe and the United States during peace negotiations. An especially crucial position given the current tensions over who should be involved in talks. This diplomatic drama is moving quickly. US and Russian officials are scheduled to meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days, aiming to end a war that's now approaching its third year. Meanwhile, European leaders are rallying. Starmer will join German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. French President Emmanuel Macron called these urgent talks in response to the US and Russia developments. Starmer plans to take his case directly to Washington soon.
But there must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. And I've been clear today, Britain will take a leading responsibility, as we always have, because Ukraine must have a secure future, Europe must have a secure future.
From London, United Kingdom, I am Arabelle Celestino reporting for NET25 World News.
It's President's Day in the U.S., and while some are celebrating, others are using the holiday to protest the man currently in the White House, Donald Trump. And thousands have gathered in Washington, D.C., rallying against what they see as his efforts to weaken government agencies and consolidate power. Trump, however, insists he's simply saving the country. In a recent social media post, he echoed Napoleon Bonaparte, writing, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." It's a worldview that legal experts say is on shaky constitutional ground as Trump pushes the limits of presidential power.
It's meant for political reasons, to kind of show the base, hey, I hear you, and I'm trying to do what you want me to do. But that's independent from the law. And the fact that the president does not make it legal. In our system of government, the fact that any government official does something does not make what they do legal. The Constitution is what makes it legal.
Now in office, Trump is taking steps that many see as using the justice system to reward allies and punish critics. One of his first moves, pardoning the rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol 4 years ago, including those convicted of assaulting police officers.
FBI agents who worked on the January 6 rioters cases, are you planning to fire the FBI agents who worked on those investigations?
No, but I'll fire some of them because some of them were corrupt. I have no doubt about that. I got to know a lot about that business, that world. I got to know a lot about that world, that we had some corrupt agents, and those people are gone, or they will be gone, and it'll be done quickly and very surgically.
His Justice Department has also dropped charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. A federal prosecutor in that case resigned, calling it a quid pro quo for Adams' cooperation on Trump administration priorities. And it doesn't stop there. Trump's Justice Department has asked for lists of FBI agents who investigated him and dismissed prosecutors involved in those cases. But his biggest challenge yet may come from courts. Judges have already blocked his executive order on federal spending, including cuts to food assistance for seniors. The administration has pushed back hard. J.D. Vance, his vice president, said on X, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power.
We believe that the injunctions that have been issued by these judges have no basis in the law and have no grounds, and we will, again, as the president said very clearly yesterday, comply with these orders, but it is the administration's position that we will ultimately be vindicated, and the president's executive actions that he took were completely within the law, they were constitutional, and we look forward to the day where he can continue to implement his agenda. And I would just add, it's our view that this is the continuation of the weaponization of justice that we have seen against President Trump. He fought it for 2 years on the campaign trail. It won't stop him now.
And one major case over Trump's power to fire officials is already before the Supreme Court. With a conservative supermajority, including 3 justices Trump himself appointed, many expect a ruling in his favor. But what happens if the court rules against him? Experts warn that enforcing a ruling could be difficult.
One enforcement mechanism is to cite the president for contempt of court, which is enforced by U.S. Marshals who work for him. So we assume they'll be fired or they'll stand down because he's told them to. The only other enforcement mechanism is impeachment, which is not going to happen because Republicans control the House and the Senate. That means, and this is why I said there's going to be a big crack in the rule of law, Because if the president refuses to comply with the court's order, and even if the court delivers it a second and third or fourth time, and he refuses to follow it, if there's no power to punish him or sanction him for that, then he gets away with it. And that is going to be a precedent in American law, which is going to come back to haunt us for decades and centuries.
The question now, if Trump loses in court on a major issue, will he actually comply? Unlike the executive branch, the Supreme Court has no police force or military to enforce its decisions, leaving many Americans wondering what happens next. Rio de Janeiro reached a record heat level of 44 degrees Celsius on Monday, according to the city's chief meteorologist Raquel Franco, triggering the heat alert for the first time.
Garatiba hit 44 degrees or 111 degrees Fahrenheit today, setting a record for both February and since Alert Rio started in 2014. The heat index sometimes exceeded 50 degrees, but generally hovered between 40 and 44 across the city.
The Heat 4 alert is activated when temperatures between 40 degrees Celsius and 44 degrees Celsius are expected to persist for at least 3 days. City officials recommended that residents avoid direct sun exposure and implemented protocols for hydration and emergency care. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is raising alarms. Reports say they've sought access to a U.S. tax system containing financial data on millions of Americans. And so far, officials haven't granted the request, but the concern is growing. In the Middle East, Lebanon is worried Israel won't fully withdraw its forces by the agreed deadline. Lebanese officials are demanding Israel's complete pullout by today. Israeli troops had already missed a previous January cutoff under a fragile ceasefire with Hezbollah. And in Southeast Asia, Myanmar has detained 273 foreigners in a crackdown on scam compounds along its border with Thailand. These sites, long linked to human trafficking, have forced thousands into illegal online scams. The arrests come as China steps up pressure on the region, following the high-profile rescue of abducted Chinese actor Wang Xing. Officials from China, Myanmar, and Thailand have now met to coordinate efforts against transnational fraud. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, Prime Minister Najib Razak has been granted bail in a money laundering case. He and his wife were detained Saturday after police raided the homes of his alleged accomplices, where they reportedly found suitcases stuffed with cash. Najib denies any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has announced a U.S. airstrike that killed a senior Al-Qaeda-linked official in northwest Syria. The target, a top finance and logistic officer for Huras al-Din, was eliminated in what Trump called a precision airstrike. He praised CENTCOM and U.S. forces for delivering what he described as justice to another militant threatening America and its allies. And the news continues here on NET25. We'll be right back. And finally, in our news, the Church of Christ keeps growing, and with that comes more places to gather in faith. In Johnsonville, Connecticut, a newly renovated house of worship has been dedicated, bringing inspiration and renewed strength to its members. Take a look.
Building houses of worship has long defined the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ as beacons of hope. This mission continues in Johnsonville, a once abandoned town now revived by the church. Through ongoing outreach and key developments, its transformation moves forward. Now, Johnsonville stands as home to one of the newest houses of worship of the Church of Christ, a testament to God's work remaining unhindered.
Great day for the church, for all the brethren here in Connecticut.
Oh, very excited po. With the grace of God, we've been waiting for this day.
It's going to be history. We don't know when it's going to be another chapel, like dedication like this.
Oh, this is wonderful. This is another, it just shows how the church is growing.
This is a celebration of history in the making. An old chapel in Johnsonville, once part of an abandoned village, has been restored and dedicated as a new house of worship. It is part of the Church of Christ's mission to build houses of worship for God's glory. As one of the newest, it has brought members from across the Northeast together in gratitude. Especially for pioneer members like Edwin, living in East Hartford, among the closest to this new house of worship, shares how his faith played an important role for this day to come.
For your faith in God and through the power of prayers, God will provide everything you need. Very blessed to us, all the members here in NET, because we are waiting for this.
Waiting to see God's plans unfold. Years before, when news broke about the surprising purchase of this desolate and once abandoned 62-acre land, leading to this historical moment.
Congratulations.
And I'm looking forward to that. I'm hopeful that it's going to be something very positive for the town. I expect it will be.
But I'm also a resident. I live not too far down the road, about 10 miles down the road in Hebron, Connecticut. And I'm super excited to see this beautiful property and how it's going to turn out a year from now. I can't wait to come back and see all the great things that the church is going to do with this property.
The Church of Christ carefully considers every property it acquires and strives to have a proper place of worship for its members. In Johnsonville, this large property offers even more. Its size and existing buildings provide many possibilities to support the church's future needs.
Every place that I've been just expands so rapidly, especially in the last 15 years. It just goes to show the love of God.
We would like to thank our Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo Manalo, for allowing us, our congregation here in Johnsonville, to dedicate this place of worship.
And with that, we end tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on NET25, I'm Alma Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Good night.